awfully be convinced that the best way to understand them, the best way to interpret them is by letting the Bible interpret them, and then you'll find that they actually fit very nicely in the history of God's dealings with Israel and ultimately then with his church. But Israel first. Always Israel first. And that is Pauline theology, that is New Testament theology, to the Jew first and also to the Gentile, writes Paul. The promises, the covenants, the Old Testament, all of the law, all of the covenants, it all belongs to Israel. And what we are told repeatedly is that the blessings that flow to the Gentiles flow through Israel and then out to the nations. And you're going to see that yet again. These symbols demand that you understand that as God's economy. Unfortunately, over the last 2,000 years, there is a genuine anti-Semitism that has grown up in the church, where the Gentile church has tried to replace Israel and even call themselves the newer, better spiritual Israel, something that the Bible never says. Old or New Testament, that statement is never made. And so in order to best understand what we're about to read, we have to keep in mind the flow of the whole Bible and that God has already told us that it is all Israel-centric. He is concerned with his people, Israel. And even though the church exists right now, we have not done away with God's promises and covenants, unconditional covenants that he has made with Israel. Give us an example, Jim. Okay, I will. Who was the Abrahamic covenant made with? Israel, the descendants, the seed of Abraham. Who was the law of Moses made with? Israel. The answer is always Israel. You don't have to think at all. You just say Israel when I ask these questions. The new covenant, here's a tough one. The church thinks the new covenant is theirs and exclusively theirs. In Jeremiah 31, the new covenant is cited as being specifically with the house of Judah and the house of Israel. Go back and read it. The first telling of the new covenant, of course, is told to the people who are under the old covenant. Because in order to make it qualitatively new, it has to be with the people who are under the old. The longest verbatim quote that is taken from the Old Testament and repeated in the New Testament is the new covenant repeated in Hebrews 8.